Well, let's talk about housing in this country. Clearly, we saw a shift during the pandemic, as borne out by the numbers out of Toronto and Vancouver, out of smaller properties in the city and out to the burbs for bigger homes. Well, the CMHC taking a look at the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, for the trends that were transpiring even before the pandemic took hold and some of the migration that we saw. Price seems to be playing a role here. Let's bring in Anthony Passarelli, Greater Toronto Area Senior Market Analyst at CMHC. And I want to start there, Anthony, because I've been curious about this in the current environment we're in with the hot markets. At what point does a market face price exhaustion? And that starts to drive people's migration patterns. And you found some interesting results here.
Yes, what we did is we undertook a study. It was prior to the pandemic. We were just trying to get a better sense of the effect of migration on house prices and vice versa. And we undertook this study where we looked at about 2 decades of data, and we noticed that during these periods where you had these house price surges in markets like Toronto and Vancouver that we saw in sort of the 2015 to 2018 period, you saw this effect where more people from those regions were moving out to their neighboring centers. So, and it was quite a significant amount. You saw people moving out of Toronto to places like Hamilton and Oshawa and Barrie, and the number of people was quite large. It was about 1 to 2% of the population of those regions coming from Toronto. So this was something that was already happening, I would say, since about 2015. In the GTA region, and again in Vancouver's case, it was to Abbotsford a lot.
Okay, so definitely, because I mean, we've long known of the real estate market. There's this idea that drive until you can afford, and maybe you start out in the city. My own story, we started out in the city. We got a 3-bedroom condo. It was pretty good for a couple, just 2 people. And then you got a kid, then you got another kid, and then suddenly you find themselves in the suburbs. I mean, it's the kind of story that plays out for so many people. But then the pandemic comes along and sort of ramps things up to perhaps what some people are worried now is an alarming degree towards that exodus out of a city.
Definitely, and just to add to what I was saying earlier as well, what we found in the study, which was I think one of the most interesting findings, is that some of these areas that were neighboring, say Toronto, like Hamilton, Oshawa, and Barrie, the influx of people from Toronto was so great that it started to price their own local residents out of their market, and you saw a greater number of people moving out of those areas as well. And some of the further away centers benefited, like Kitchener-Waterloo, St. Catharines, Niagara, even areas like Kawarthas, Collingwood, that sort of thing. So you saw this sort of ripple effect through the market. And this was, again, this 2015 and 2019 period we looked at. And some of those same themes seem to be applying today. However, we don't have the data yet. Unfortunately, this within province migration data is available only up until July of 2020. And so we don't have really a lot of that post-pandemic housing rebound period. So we'll have to wait on that a bit before we come out with any other conclusions. However, some of these themes are, like I said, were already in play prior to the pandemic.
Now, prior to the pandemic as well, some of my younger colleagues at work would say, Toronto's far too expensive, I'm never going to own a home. And I could say to them, in all honesty, my young colleagues, that, well, if you move out to where I live, because I'm out in Brampton, I'm out in the burbs, you could probably afford to get into the market. And at some point, maybe you make that trade-off, right? You get out of the city, which is exciting and vibrant, and you come out to where I am in the sleepy suburbs. I can't make that argument with them anymore because the suburbs have just taken off. I guess the point I'm trying to get at is affordability is getting pressured even more so during the pandemic for people who thought, well, one day I move to the cities and move out of the city and trade up to a bigger house. That house in the suburbs now is very expensive.
It is, and I think that's what's part of what's causing, it seems like, more people moving even further out. And the other thing we note on in the report, even though it doesn't cover the pandemic period because of the lack of data availability, we do touch on teleworking and the potential influence that would have on migration going forward. We reference a couple studies that show that, first of all, teleworking wasn't really that big of a thing prior to the pandemic, to the point where it really influenced migration before then. But since the pandemic, we know obviously teleworking the incidence of it is very high, and you probably expect to see it remain above pre-pandemic levels. And this ability to telework is something to pay attention to, because it allows people to move from these larger, more expensive population centers to smaller ones. Stats can put out an interesting survey where they looked at teleworking by the population center you live in, and they found that more people telework in these larger population centers, mostly due to the nature of the jobs that they have. So there is that potential for more of this movement further and further out to small population centers. And as we showed in the study we did, that does have some potential negative consequences if the housing supply isn't there to meet the demand.
I think about some of these centres that are further afield from Toronto, and my apologies to audience members who don't live in this area, but Collingwood, beautiful place, but you hear about home prices there jumping 20-30% because people are moving out of the cities out to there as well. And that speaks to me of the dislocation you talked about. There is a local real estate market of people who live there, and then when money comes in from the outside, from the big city, it can really sort of throw things off balance.
Yes, that's definitely what we found in the study. And I find that the supply side, we really highlighted in the report that when these house price surges occur, because demand is really high, it tends to be because the supply doesn't really respond. Whether it's resale listings or the new home market, it's kind of slow to respond. And that causes this price surge, and then causes more of the sort of local residents to maybe not be able to afford homes and move further out.
All right, Anthony, fascinating stuff. Thanks for breaking it down for us.
Thanks for having me.
Anthony Passarelli is the Greater Toronto Area Senior Market Analyst at CMHC, Canada's housing agency.